It flew! It flew! Oh my god, I'm so excited to go to Mars! Oh, it flew? DCX flew? That's great! Once the test program's complete, then we can move on to DCY. Then, with SSTOs that can land themselves, as God and Heinlein intended, then we'll have true low-cost space access for everyone.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Morning everyone, Slav Squat Cosmonaut here with part 2 of my criticizing Starship nonsense. As this is a part 2, I highly recommend you watch the first part, but I'm not your dad, so you don't have to listen. Now for this part, we're to look at Starship beyond the current commercial regime. Moon, Mars, and beyond. We'll also look at things like costs, details, and the Musk in the room. What's that? Everyday Astronaut has a response already. Roll it.
No, Starship will fly 100%.
I guess. It's the business case that's iffy.
Getting to orbit was impossible with Falcon 1. They lost 3 of them, the 4th one worked.
No, they're skeptical. The last time a private rocket had flown before was back in the 90s, and it blew up a minute into flight. The company ran out of money, and, there were no more flights.
Falcon 9 was impossible, way too ambitious, because they went from just this little tiny stick to a way bigger orbital payload, 10 times the payload. That was impossible.
No one said that.
They'll never fly something to the ISS. That's impossible. A private company can't do that. They did that.
No, the people who said that don't trust Musk or are just against commercial spaceflight in general. They exist.
They'll never win, then they'll never land a rocket. Oh, guess what? They landed a rocket. Okay, cool, you landed a rocket, but, you're not going to be able to reuse that. It's all torn up. It's just a pipe dream. You'll never be able to reuse the rocket. Oh, now they reuse them all the time.
Rockets have landed before. It's the economic case that everyone's questioning.
Falcon Heavy never happened. Falcon Heavy can never happen. It's way too complicated. SpaceX doesn't know what they're doing. They're a bunch of kids.
No one said that. They said it would be a lot harder than Elon said it would be, which it was.
The average age of mission controllers was 26 for the Apollo program, so kids can do a lot of awesome things.
They can also do stupid things. So what? Besides, last time I checked, those kids don't stay at SpaceX because of the miserable working conditions.
People that say SpaceX can't do something have just not been paying attention.
Paying attention isn't enough. You actually have to be critical and examine everything they say and do. Biting commentary. So, on to Mars. My analysis of Starship as a commercial launch vehicle shows it's probably not going to be that much of a game changer due to logistics issues mostly. But Musk's ambitions, of course, aim higher, more towards, the stars. So let's see how it stacks up there. Per the user's guide, Starship can't go to the moon on its own. And as a reference, SLS Block 1 can toss 26 tons to the moon. With propellant resupply, of course, Starship can carry 100 tons to the lunar surface. I did the math to see if it could go from low Earth orbit, the lunar surface, and back, and Starship can't even do that on its own without any payload. It's just too heavy. Which means if you want to go to the lunar surface and come back, you'll probably have to refuel on the surface or from a depot in lunar orbit, which those have been studied before, and those are viable solutions. The big issue here is a lack of need for 100 tons of payload to the lunar surface. Now, before you get mad, I'm not saying no one needs it. I'm just saying that no one's proposing anything at this juncture. Furthermore, moon mining and other proposals for business there really don't have any serious traction at this point, because so far these companies have made tech demos, CGI, and then go bankrupt. Plus, the economic case for space mining in general just doesn't exist at this point. Starship made it into the HLS contract. You're wrong about everything. We didn't read it then. Starship beat out a rehash of the Altair lander from Constellation and Boeing's plan, which didn't follow the rules of the competition. If you actually read the contract award, it notes that Starship, while very ambitious, is quite unlikely to meet the 2024 landing goal. 2024 is an ambitious goal, and it's unlikely we'll be meeting that. It's going to be more like 2026 to 2028. I'm not going to be talking about it, though. Moon's a distraction. Mars is the true ambition of SpaceX and Elon. Yes, peasants. Mars. What? 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 Who are you? You're in the wrong video. Shoo. Remember the logistics problem of refueling Starship for basic commercial spaceflight? Well, for Musk's Mars plans, it's a nightmare. Elon has said Mars-bound starships will undergo 2 rounds of refueling. First, they'll enter low Earth orbit and be refueled there. Then they will burn to HEO, highly eccentric Earth orbit. He hasn't given any orbital parameters. Where it'll be refueled once more and then fired off to Mars. You can see the problem here already. Starship's baseline performance beyond LEO is abysmal, which means any HEO tankers will need refueling on their own before even getting to the Mars-bound starships. And based on my estimations and other calculations from the last video, it's going to be quite a long time before a starship's refueled to go to Mars. So our colonists will spend, a year in Earth orbit before even leaving. Great mission design, Elon. Besides, Musk's Mars plans are mostly just a sales pitch. There's no real discussion of things like, infrastructure, life support systems, radiation shielding, or pretty much anything needed for a crude Mars mission, let alone Mars colonization. Side note, Mars colonization will cost orders of magnitude more than even most optimistic Starlink profit estimates. A future video is going to discuss this more in depth, but just suffice it to say, Musk's Mars vision is mostly science fiction at this juncture. Saying, we're gonna do it, does not make these things possible and does not make them happen. Just ask the SSTO guys. Logistics, man. They're killer. Oh, and this applies to the rest of the concept art provided, by the way. For example, in this picture, the crew in this starship is dead. That's because Jupiter's magnetic field is lethal to anything within Callisto's orbit. Speaking of Jupiter, we have to ask ourselves why Starship would be good for uncrewed interplanetary missions. It really doesn't. This is Starship and its payload, by the way. I don't have any models. Do you refuel it? Burn? Dump the payload? Burn back? My orbital mechanics background ends with patched conics, so I'm not going to do the math, but it doesn't sound that good. Or you just get rid of a fully reusable vehicle. And no, making Starship into a gigantic space probe is not a good idea. Sure, you could cram in plenty of scientific equipment and things, but you still have to manage this enormous vehicle. It's like exploring the Amazon with the Queen Mary. Not a good idea. But internet engineers have suggested giving Starship a big ol' kick stage, like the IUS or Centaur. Guess what I did? I designed a big upper stage for Starship. Just so we're all clear here, no one's actually doing this. This is just for reference. As you can see, I did 3 BUSs. One powered by LOX methane, which is a propellant currently under development by 3-ish. 3 if you count ULA. LOX hydrogen, which has been flying since 1963, and then NTLMH, which has been flying forever too. Now for this design, I decided to make our big upper stage go on a translunar injection trajectory. Why is this? That's easy math, and it's pretty much a baseline interplanetary injection. And for this design, I used the full 100 metric tons LEO capacity of Starship. So the full propellant, payload, and dry stage mass add up to roughly 100 metric tons. Our first stage, powered by a Raptor vacuum, because SpaceX is working on that, can toss 35.83 metric tons to the moon. Decent payload performance. Our storable Super Agena Super Delta K stage, powered by a magical AJ-10, can toss 30 metric tons to the moon. Neat. And the final one, our Mega Centaur, powered by the RL-10B2, can toss 42 metric tons to the moon, which coincidentally is what SLS Block 1B can do. Now remember, Starship can't go to the moon on its own without resupply, and the stages here are me just speculating. I do advise reading Taming Liquid Hydrogen for discussion of building an upper stage that fits within a, well, frankly, shuttle-like payload bay, just for safety concerns and structural considerations. Which does bring me to one other issue I have with Starship, is that big hatch there. It kind of concerns me. Because, if it doesn't open or it gets jammed, you lose the mission. Which probably isn't good for insurance or launch costs. Speaking of the user's guide, costs are the big contention people have when they bring up Starship. Elon says it's going to cost $2 million a launch, which is nonsense. The only way you can get anywhere close to $2 million a launch, by the way, is if you're flying Starship 3 times a day, every day, and ignore costs of things like infrastructure, amortization of R&D, propellant production facilities, insurance, and other real things that go into a real space program. And 3 flights a day will never happen in our lifetimes, especially with a vehicle like Starship. And if you want to get real numbers, tough luck. The user's guide says email the sales team at SpaceX. So I had to come up with a way of doing it myself. Now, if you read the United Launch Alliance paper discussing smart reuse and a cost breakdown of a launch system, you'll discover that Propellant is roughly 0.5% the cost of a total launch. If you look at Falcon 9 data and do some calculations there, this is roughly true. So that's what I did. I'm using Propellant to estimate the costs of a launch system. Now this method is awful. Don't use it. There are real things in there, like reuse costs, amortization, the real things. Also, the big factor here is scaling laws. Using that propellant cost estimation method gives an Electron-sized vehicle, the launch vehicle Electron, the same dollars per kilogram as a Saturn V, which isn't true at all. So just for all clear, this isn't the best method. Assuming that propellant is roughly 0.5% of launch costs and LOX methane is 58 cents a kilogram, based on my own research, Starship would cost $2.61 billion per launch, which is about $5,200 a kilogram to LEO. This, however, is in line with shuttle, Saturn V, and SLS cost estimates, but those are expendable launchers, for the most part. If we use Falcon 9 as a reference for costs, Falcon 9 is about 2/3 the cost of an existing expendable launch vehicle, give or take, which means that Starship will cost between $660 million to $1.74 billion per launch. And if we get propellant costs maybe, let's say, 3% that of a launch, then our dollars per kilogram to LEO is about 870. However, Elon thinks rockets are airplanes. They aren't, so let's look at how airline costs factor in. Per my own research, fuel costs about 15% that of an airplane's flight. So, parse that out to Starship, that's like $174 a kilogram, which would be a game changer, except for 2 things. Airlines operate at very thin profit margins, and airline-like operation for a rocket is never going to happen in our lifetimes. An optimistic cost estimate for Starship would put it between $200 to $300 million a launch. but we're just speculating here. I haven't been able to find anything that gives realistic cost estimates for Starship, and the user's guide, again, doesn't offer anything. In fact, the user's guide really doesn't offer much. To put this into perspective, Blue Origin has released a user's guide for New Glenn. And New Glenn, as we all know, is so far a test payload fairing, CGI, and a delayed engine program. And you know what its user's guide has? Gantt charts, timelines. It gives you the layout of the offices and payload processing facilities, the parts per million of dust, the clean room, what's available, like outlets that are available to you, the cranes, transport facilities, what the payload fairing conditions will be like, what the payload adapter will be like, so you can plug your spacecraft in so you can orient it. It's got a lot of very real things that if you look at any other user's guide, they'll have too. This is a joke. The cynical take is that SpaceX is desperately trying to convince us that Starship is a serious development, or that this is Elon's little playground to keep him away from the real operations at SpaceX so he doesn't wreck them. Or SpaceX is genuinely delusional. I just can't tell. But you really can't take this seriously. They've hopped 2 test vehicles. Yes, they've finally figured out how to make steel pressure tanks. Neat. No one's ever done that before. Before you give me that rapid iteration spiel, which is drivel, I'm going to say these tank failures were because of a problem with SpaceX as a company. This is hard to explain. So I want to take a look at another company that's been having a lot of issues, which are symptoms of flaws within the company itself. Boeing. 737 MAX and Starliner are symptoms of a greater problem at Boeing. This should be obvious. And from what I read and from what I gather, it's because Boeing was a company of engineers taken over by managers. And what do managers know about engineering? Nothing. And you can see the results. SpaceX has a problem. I can't pinpoint it, but I suspect it's something along the lines of the Silicon Valley psychosis, where old things are dumb because, well, they're old. For example, an early Falcon 1 failure was caused by the second stage not having anti-slosh baffles. As it turns out, SpaceX didn't think they needed them. Blowing up tanks in a field is not testing. Those were screw-ups. For comparison, that big SLS hydrogen tank rupture was verification of the computer models used to make sure that the actual real-life tank was within tolerances and limits of the design. This fail fast, fail often mentality that SpaceX uses has logical extents here. You can't iterate a crew back to life. Starship is marginally safer than the shuttle. Musk says that the Raptors on Starship can pull the vehicle away from an exploding super heavy, but he doesn't provide any evidence of this. Oh, and everyday astronauts never heard of plane crashes. The engines would have to spool up after the abort system triggers faster than it would take the super heavy booster to disintegrate. I have some serious doubts on that. Landing is also an issue. From what I've read, Starship could theoretically land on one engine after the other 2 have failed, but there's really no substantiation of this. Now, I know those hops used one engine, but those were more publicity stunts, and they're not like a full vehicle coming down from space. Now, for cargo vehicles, I'm fine with propulsive landing because there aren't people in them. For a crewed passenger craft, I'd like to see something more than that, some more safety features put in. For example, airplanes, for the most part, don't need engines working to land. So I know Elon says he's going to fly Starship hundreds of times before considering man-rating it, but remember my analysis of the market? It's going to be a while before Starship sees that. Safety is an issue. Elon seems to have very little concern for it. Look at his COVID-19 response. The sheriff of Alameda County had to tell him that Tesla was not an essential business and send his employees home. And we're not even going to talk about the problems at Tesla. Getting back to the analogy at the very beginning of this, the semi-truck grocery shopping proposition, you have three real options with this. First one is buy the semi-truck and use it once a year to get your groceries. Or you could buy it and then pool with your neighbors and go every 2 weeks to get your groceries. Or you could just flat out reject it. Now the first two do seem quite nice, quite a good proposition. Using a semi-truck to get all your groceries is an efficient use of a semi-truck. Same with pooling together with your neighbors so you can use it a lot. But then you forget your mustard. And all of a sudden, a semi-truck is kind of stupid. I don't need a semi-truck to get mustard. Or I could just bum a ride off somebody else. And I'll put it this way. Elon shouldn't have a monopoly on space launch, and I don't need a 747 to fly from Huntsville to Atlanta. Oh, and the low-cost launch vehicle design methods I brought up a long time ago. Reuse, of course, is the big one they're going for, but I don't see Starship flying enough to justify that. And sure, making the vehicle the same diameter using the same propellants is always a good cost reduction method. Building it out of steel is straight out of the BDB playbook, but Big Dumb Booster gets its low cost from looser weight tolerances and big pressure-fed engines, which Starship doesn't have. And this design for mass production, the idea to build thousands of them, well, that's bizarre. Very, very bizarre. Unless they still can't build tanks, of which then, yeah, you'd have to build a lot. And we have one more thing to discuss. While we are looking at Starship from more of an engineering and launch industry perspective, nothing exists in a void. External factors play a role in how we draw our conclusions on these things. One of these external factors is the person proposing said thing. For example, if I was a blood draw med student here and I was examining this shiny new medical device that can do things that are, well, medically impossible, and the CEO of the company started talking like this, "We're to change the world," I'd be really concerned. So how does Elon hold up to scrutiny? Oh boy. Except I'm not going to talk about Elon's problems. You could bring up Tesla's non-existent quality control, the solar roof fire lawsuits, how Solar City just looks to be fraud, swatting a whistleblower, or the abysmal working conditions. If there's one thing workers like, it's being shouted at and fired on the spot, right on the factory floor for real or imagined issues. The people I'm trying to get to listen to me about this part won't. They're going to say things like, "You hate him because he's successful and you're not." Or that I simply don't understand the vision. Because that's what Elon's greatest achievement is. It's building this image of himself as a savior figure who will, protect the environment with electric cars and then save humanity with taking some of us to colonize Mars. The weird mythologization and quasi-religious treatment of Musk and his companies makes criticism of them rather difficult. Any criticism is seen as illegitimate or dismissed outright as Elon's word is taken over others for no real reason. And it's understandable why. Elon is selling you the science fiction future you all want, and his fans live their fantasies vicariously through him. He's cool. He's a nerd tech billionaire guy with a rocket company, and he's great PR and likes the things you do too. I mean, come on, he did the anime Twitter profile picture once, and he's been on Rick and Morty, I think, and he likes memes. So any criticism of Elon extends to criticism of you, the fanboy. Don't believe me? Go to any undergraduate aerospace class and you'll find either a Musk fanboy or a Musk wannabe. I would know. I was one. I've gotten better since then. The irony is that he is a contradiction of his own supposed ideals and vision. The dude flies around LA in his private jet to avoid traffic. He tries to destroy public transport infrastructure, despite the fact that that would be more environmentally friendly than an electric car. And my God, the dude has Twitter meltdowns like a 10-year-old. The other thing that everyone forgets is, at his core, Elon is a salesman. He's selling this to you. Of course it's going to be amazing, cheap, and everything you're looking for. Spoken like a true pedo guy. Is this over yet? I'm the pressure-fed astronaut. End me. SLS versus Starship. Who wins? SLS. SLS, while delayed, over budget, and a program management nightmare, is done. It's a conservative design based on the accomplishment of the past and is a natural extension of these developments. When it flies, and it will fly, it will do the job it is set out to do. Fly interplanetary NASA missions to the Moon, Mars, and beyond. Starship, on the other hand, requires serious technological development to achieve that. Starship is the classic Silicon Valley product. It's more of a solution looking for a problem than anything else. Because the problem here is not needing 100 tons to LEO, it's the cost of sending 20 up. Starship, by the way, is overpowered for LEO launches and completely underpowered for anything beyond low Earth orbit. And even then, it's an overtly complex system. But I do see some uses for it. Depots are the big one. A superheavy-lift vehicle like Starship and its proposed capabilities could make depots viable. The other is orbital debris recovery. Starship, like the shuttle, has significant downmass capability, which could lead to debris collection. And the last one is for maybe launching LEO infrastructure, you know, the basis for a space station or like a space hotel. Though I should say here, I don't see Starship flying any real capacity. There's something wrong with Elon and his companies. Yes, I know it's been included for the HLS contract for Artemis, which makes this assessment hard. Because on one hand, NASA is giving them money for a vehicle with frankly unrealistic expectations. And on the other, you have a deranged CEO, a pathetic user's guide, and frankly no real business case for the vehicle. It's hard. In conclusion, this video is way too long. Is Starship better than SLS? Only under fantastic circumstances. And yes, I will be revisiting this in a year or two. Probably after SLS launches. Just kidding. I've gotten a lot more attention than I anticipated in the last few months, mostly unintentionally. That was definitely not on the to-do list for this year. And I think I'm up to 55 subscribers now, last time I checked. So that's really exciting. You all are cool, cryogenic even. That's a pun. And so thanks for thinking I'm worth listening to. Or hate watch, that's the other one. Next video will not be covering everyday astronauts why SSTOs suck. As I've discovered, it was going to be another big multi-part series where we look at books, do math, and look at pretty pictures of old concept art, which would take a long time, and I'm lazy. So instead, we'll be looking at Orphan Red's video on why the ISS is fake, because she doesn't understand material science. So that'll be fun. And last time I asked you what this was. It's Oost, one of Philip Bono's early SSTO designs. Everyday Astronaut was going to bring it up in his video, and it was going to be wrong, so I was going to go, ah ha ha, you're wrong. But, things happened. So what's this? Well, I'm tired, so, bye.